Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. Appreciate you joining us today. Lots of people in chat saying hi from all over the place, which is fantastic. A lot of friends over in the UK and in Europe, places like that. It's pretty late in the day, so we really appreciate you joining us today. We're going to be going through Perl 2, a little bit of kind of talking about it and theorizing about it, but then also doing some hands-on with it. So just a few housekeeping notes throughout today's presentation. There will be a number of polls that come up. There is one up already now, just asking what sort of industry, what sort of sector you're part of. So open up the polls panel there in Crowdcast and weigh in on those polls as they come up. We really appreciate your feedback there. This is actually valuable information to us. It helps us understand, what pieces of products are interesting to different audience members and where they fit. So this is important information for us in determining where to go forward with Epiphan products in the future. Also for Q&A, we will have Q&A primarily at the end of the presentation today. So there is a Q&A panel in Crowdcast as well. So feel free to put your questions in there. There's a ranking and upvote system as part of the Q&A panel. So if you see someone else's question that you feel is particularly relevant or is a duplication of your own question, feel free to use that upvote button. That'll change the ranking on my side, and I'll be answering them in that order. So yeah, great to see people from all over the place. Really appreciate it. All right. I did see a few more people just joining here, so I'm just playing a little bit of a delay tactic while we let people get in here and settle in. We don't want people to miss anything. So I hope you're all doing well. I hope everyone is excited for this one. This is a webinar that we have done similar before, walkthroughs on Perl. But every time we do it live, it's going to be a little bit different because of what you guys bring to the table in terms of interaction and questions and so on. And I do see one question there. I'm just going to address this one. Will it be recorded? Yes, we do record and post VODs of all of our webinars. So you can find that on our website under the webinars tab. And we do usually post them to our YouTube channel a few days later as well. So yes, there are always VODs available of these webinars. All right, I think we're probably pretty settled in here. We're a few minutes past the hour now, so let's jump in. So welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is all about Perl 2, the ultimate all-in-one live video production system. We have a ton of stuff to talk about with Perl, and we're really excited to bring that to you today. So let's run through the agenda very quickly here. We're going to break this down into 4 parts, basically. We're going to do a little bit of overview on Perl 2, and we're going to be going through slides to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about where Perl 2 fits, where its place is within the Perl family of products, of which there are now 3 models. Third, we'll go into a little bit of hands-on live demo with a Perl UI and kind of click through different menus, show you where we would do some of the things we're going to talk about in the overview. And then fourth, we will get to your questions. Of course, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A panel throughout the presentation, and we will address those later on. So the Perl 2, as an overview, what is Perl 2 and kind of what's the idea? Why would I want to use it? Why is it so amazing? And what is really the main thing it's going to deliver in terms of its value? So Perl 2 is an all-in-one network-based video encoder and live production system. The idea is to kind of take a bunch of the traditional pieces you might see, like a switcher and a recorder and a streamer and a splitter and a scaler, kind of take all of those traditional pieces of equipment and simplify them and squeeze them down into a single piece of hardware, which is where the all-in-one comes from. We want to be able to do our streaming, recording, live switching, all on a single device. That's the idea with Perl 2. And at the same time, make it as simple and as easy to use as possible. So as an all-in-one production system, it means we have to have a lot of stuff in there, but we also don't want to overcomplicate it, since Perl is positioned to kind of really slot into just about any workflow. So with Pearl 2, we can stream and record in up to 4K. We have up to 6 video inputs. Some of those are HD, some are capable of 4K. We have 4 XLR line level audio inputs for professional audio. There's a 4-inch touchscreen built into the front of a Pearl 2 that gives us a lot of the control aspect, from basic settings out of the box to even routine start, stop, and switching control as we use the device. Pearl 2 has a 500 gig SSD built into it for recording media. And then we can support kind of other more advanced studio level features like supporting NDI and chroma keying and a number of other features that we're going to drill down into. And of course, you can see here in this slide a picture of the front and the back of the portable, the desktop version of Pearl 2. And one of the reasons we call it the portable is we do actually ship it in a hard Pelican style rugged case. So it's something that people do very often take on the road with them. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into the video inputs on a Pearl 2. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 6 physical video inputs, and we generally recommend a combination of up to 6 from whatever sources they might be. So physically, we have 2 HDMI inputs that are capable of up to full HD or 1920 by 1200 if you're into 1610 aspects. We have 2 HDMI inputs that are capable of up to 4K, but they're also capable of HD easily. We have 2 SDI inputs, and these are 12G SDI capable, so they're also capable of up to 4K, but are, of course, backwards compatible with 3G, 6G, HD, and so on. And then we also have some other alternative video inputs that we can use, including USB ports that we could bring in maybe a webcam or even a USB-based capture card or other pieces. And then we could also bring in some options from the network as well. So that Ethernet jack allows us to bring in network streams from things like NDI, and that could be full NDI or NDI-HX. We could bring in RTSP, or we could even bring in SRT. And we're going to talk a lot more about that a little later. Of course, this is also where we output our streams, and we do include NDI as part of that, as well as many other stream types that we're going to talk about. In terms of the audio support, as I mentioned, there's 4 XLR jacks. These are Pro line level. They can be used as 2 separate balanced stereo pairs, or they could be separated into 4 independent mono inputs. They're still line level. They do not provide phantom power. So typically, these are going to be coming from an external professional audio system, whether that's a mixer, a preamp, or whatever you might have in play. But typically, there's some other preamp system involved, and we're taking a line main out from that system into Pearl 2. In addition to the XLR inputs, we do also have a sort of piggyback RCA jack input, sort of a secondary to the B channel. And then we also can bring in audio embedded on HDMI and SDI. And so all of those HDMI and SDI ports, we could be bringing in embedded audio on all of those at the same time. In addition to that, we could also use USB audio. So we could connect a USB microphone. In fact, what I'm using right now as part of this webinar is I use a Blue Yeti Nano as a USB microphone connected to my Pearl. And I use that as audio in my home setup as a simplified piece. So, we can easily connect things like that. This gives us a ton of flexibility in video and audio inputs. It means we can bring in content from a huge variety of different signals and put Pearl in a ton of different situations that fits pretty much anywhere where you need to capture video and audio and stream and record it. That's pretty much where Pearl fits at a very basic level. So what does that look like when we connect these things? Well, we might connect up to 6 different video sources, from cameras to computers, maybe some network-based signals, bring in our audio mix, and then we can record directly on Pearl, and we can output from Pearl over live streams like RTMP, HLS, Dash, SRT. And then we can also use the HDMI output ports on the back of Pearl. And I'll go one slide back here just to highlight those. They're beside our USB ports here. We can use those to go out to a larger confidence monitor, or even enable the local console mode, which would give us a full kind of administrator interface on a monitor, and we could use those USB ports for a keyboard mouse. So we looked at a picture of the portable version a little earlier. Pearl 2 also comes in rack mount form factors. So we do have the portable one, as I mentioned earlier, comes in that rugged case straight from the factory. But we also have the rack mounts, and some people will use the rack mount to go into their own, smaller portable rack like this picture shows, or it's going into a much larger rack for a permanent installation. So we have the single rack mount, which, aside from being wider than the desktop, is identical. Same inputs, same capabilities. It's just a 2U 19-inch rack. We also have the rack mount twin. And the rack mount twin is basically just 2 separate Pearl 2 units that are sharing the same rack chassis. So the advantage here is high density installation. It's still a 2U 19-inch rack, but it's 2 units occupying that space. So this means if we're in a position where we need multiple units for whatever reason that might be, we could get something like the twin and minimize the amount of physical space it occupies in our rack. So this can be very important, especially in the context of a smaller portable rack where we have other equipment in there as well as a flight case. The twin can occupy less space, but still give us 2 units that we can leverage in different ways. So I've seen customers who use these devices in sort of that live event space where one of the sides of that twin is doing all the recording, ISO recording and so on, and the other one is doing all of their streaming and program mixing and stuff like that. And other people have used it as a hot standby. If something were to go wrong, they have another unit there. There's a variety of ways of using that. And you can see the back shot of these single and twin rack mounts. The layout is identical to the portable we were looking at just a moment ago. There's just, double everything on the twin essentially. And so it's very easy to use those. So the other thing we need to look at with the Pearl 2 is how we control it. There's multiple ways of controlling a Pearl 2. As I mentioned off the top, it is primarily a network-based appliance, but there's other ways that we can control a Pearl. There's the built-in touchscreen that I talked about, which gives us some confidence monitoring. We can if we have multiple encoding channels, we can scroll between those to see what they're all doing. We can start-stop recording. We can start-stop streaming. We can look at an audio meter, so we have a little bit of confidence on the audio. There is a headphone jack on the front. We could monitor the audio in a set of headphones as well. We can even do switching from that front touchscreen by bringing up the switching interface for one of our encoding channels. And we can also do some system settings in there. So for example, out of the box, we might need to set up some specific network settings in order to be compatible with the network we're plugging into. We can do that from the front screen of Pearl 2. And so that can be a great advantage during the setup process. The other way we can do it is a browser-based UI. That's the main administrator UI. And we're going to look at that in our live demo portion. But that admin web UI is the deepest level of control that you have on a Pearl 2. And you can access it in a browser from anything that has a browser. Now, obviously, most people are going to use laptops and computers, things like that. But it's not app-based. It doesn't require software. It doesn't require plugins. You can load it in any web browser you like. Similarly, if we enabled the HDMI outputs for local console mode, we would have access to that administrator interface locally from the device without having to use another computer, with a network connection that way. So there's some advantages there. And then lastly, we also have a secondary web browser-based UI that we call Epiphan Live. And this is a much more operator-oriented dashboard. It's a lot more visual than the administrator UI in terms of, seeing video confidence monitoring and things like that. But it's also, not exposing all of the deeper administrator settings. It's focused around the routine controls once the system's been kind of configured the way it's going to be typically used. So you can do confidence monitoring, you can stop recording and streaming, you can do some switching, but that's about it. There's not a whole lot more to it. The biggest advantages, of course, is that it is shielding the more important settings, so no one can break the config, but also that it works extremely well in a mobile browser with a touchscreen style interface. It was designed specifically for that. Again, it's still a browser, so it's not app-based. You can run it in any browser you like, but it does work extremely well on a tablet or a smartphone or a laptop that has a touch screen. And this can really make that point of control for your operators a little easier in some situations. So again, Epiphan Live it's a fantastic piece. A lot of our customers really enjoy using it, and we are going to look at that in the live portion as well. So there's quite a bit that we can kind of, the admin does their job. They set up the Pearl, they've configured everything the way it needs to be, and then have confidence that handing off to an operator running the show at the time, they can do that in Epiphan Live effectively, but also very simply and not overcomplicating matters. Another very important part of the Pearl 2 is the way that we can customize our content. And one of the main ways we do that is through the custom layout builder in our encoding channels. With the layout builder, we can make a combination of different inputs. We can crop those input signals. We can scale them to fit wherever we need them to fit. And we can add overlays of images or text, background images, maybe a semi-transparent PNG image as a watermark over top. There's actually a lot that we can do here to kind of dress up our content, right? And ultimately that's important, especially when we're talking about live streaming, is that the more engaging the content is, the more people are going to stick with it and be interested in it and pay attention. So making sure that we define the look and feel of our content in a way that is on brand, but is also, looks good. Sometimes that basic standard picture in picture, the camera's up locked in the corner and then the rest is just a giant full screen. That's not very engaging. It's kind of ugly. It's not very dynamic. So being able to customize that, to choose exactly the size, the positioning, the scaling, the cropping, all of these elements to kind of increase the visual quality and look and feel of your content can be very important. Now, of course, we can also build multiple layouts in our encoding channels, and that's where Pearl's switching comes into play. And again, in our live demo, we're going to take a deeper dive into that. But once we can do that, that's where we can really make a production shine. Pearl 2 also offers some pretty powerful integrations. Now, these aren't ones that necessarily serve everybody, but for those who are looking to leverage platforms like Kaltura and Panopto, Pearl can directly integrate with these platforms. And what that means is automatic event synchronization, meaning you register the Pearl to Panopto or Kaltura. In those platforms, you can then build out your entire schedule. Maybe it's a class schedule at a university. You build that schedule out, assign Pearl to what it's supposed to be doing. Perl will download that event schedule and automatically start and stop the event and send the asset back to the platform where it's supposed to be. This makes an automation really simple and really powerful with Kaltura or Panopto because it just does it all in the back end. Now, you can also do some ad hoc events this way, create them on the fly and get them sent to those platforms as well. And you can even do that from the front touchscreen to authenticate with your Kaltura Panopto username, tell it to go to maybe your folder or something like that, and start and stop an ad hoc event. These are extremely powerful integrations for people who are looking to use Perls within a larger content management system ecosystem like Kaltura and Panopto. Another big key feature with Perl, and often this is a pretty big standout in terms of the AV equipment world, is that we've tried to not only make Perls easy to use, get up and running from a network perspective, but also to do so without sacrificing any of the networking and security capabilities. So it could be as simple as just plugging it in and getting a DHCP assigned address. But we could also go to the point where maybe it's a statically assigned address. Maybe we need people to authenticate using their LDAP domain credentials. We need to control different roles of the built-in accounts if we're not using LDAP. Maybe we're in a situation where our IT team has mandated that nothing gets plugged into the network unless it can authenticate with 802.1x access control. Perl can do all of these things. And very similarly, there's a lot of mandates out there now that anything that uses a web browser-based UI must be secured with HTTPS SSL. Perl 2 can do that as well, including using your own customized certificates for that. So from a security standpoint, it's got basically every layer that your IT team wants to see. Things like LDAP, 802.1x, HTTPS. But it's also very simple in kind of the on-the-go kits where, you may not have control of the network. You're just automatically getting assigned an IP address and working with that. So it can be no fuss and high security at the same time, which is amazing. Another part of the Epiphan Perl family, and certainly it was really powerful with Perl 2, is Epiphan Cloud. Epiphan Cloud is a service from Epiphan, which allows you to pair your Perls to your cloud account, which you can open an Epiphan Cloud account for free, and pair your Perls to it, where you can then monitor in the cloud the status of those devices. You can start, stop streaming, start, stop recording, all entirely within the cloud. This is a great tool for maybe managing a fleet of devices, or maybe you only have one device, but you're not physically on site and you just need to keep an eye on things. Being able to do that remotely in the cloud gives really a super powerful tool. And in fact, how I'm going to be accessing the Perl 2 for our live demo a little later, I will be accessing that through Epiphan Cloud. So having said all these things, looked at some of the capabilities as a brief overview on Perl 2, where does Perl 2 fit within the Perl family of products? The family now consists of 3 different models. Perl Nano, which is the most recent model released, has been shipping for a few weeks now, and we did a webinar about that not long ago. It's kind of that entry-level, perfect fit streaming and recording appliance, simplified, small box, great, easy to use. Perl Mini fits in the middle of the product family, where it is a simplified video production system. It's not as powerful as Perl 2, but it can still do a lot of the same things. It can bring in up to 3 inputs, can have a couple of encoding channels, it can do some mixing and switching, but it doesn't have some of the more advanced things like chroma keying or NDI support. Perl 2 that we've been talking about fits at the top end of the Perl family. So this is the biggest unit that we make. So it has up to those 6 inputs, up to 4K capabilities, NDI support, chroma keying support, and all these other pieces. So this is sort of the full line here, and we're talking about the biggest one today. That to say, all of the pearls within the product family come from the same design philosophy. The goal is to be as versatile as possible, reliable, as easy to use as possible, while still offering professional quality, durability, and capabilities, all in a single device. And they deliver this in different ways. Again, Pearl 2 being the biggest is certainly the most versatile, but not everyone needs all those things. And so there are those other model options as well. So Pearl 2, it's ideal for that all-in-one production from maybe a studio perspective, where you're going to have multiple cameras and different content sources. It's also great for larger scale productions where maybe 4K is important, or again, you have maybe up to 6 cameras that you're switching between. It's also great as a production hub for ingesting remote SRT contribution streams, mixing them together, and then sending that back out as your finished program. Now, this is a workflow that we are seeing more and more, and it's a workflow that we are using ourselves on a weekly basis. Of course, Pearl 2 in the rack mount twin also gives us an element of redundancy if we're looking for that as well. So let's talk a little bit more about SRT, because that is a fairly hot issue. It's one we've done a number of webinars on. It's something we get questions on all the time. And we use, like I said, on a weekly basis, multiple times a week often. And what we're typically doing is exactly this. We have a remote contribution encoder, and that could be a Pearl Nano or a Pearl Mini or even another Pearl 2. It's taking the video and audio inputs, encoding them and streaming them over SRT to a Pearl 2 that's operating as our production hub. Now, in this case, the remote contribution encoder is me. I'm using a Pearl to send that SRT stream into a Pearl 2 that's in our office, where bandwidth is more plentiful, but also where we have a whole bunch of other signals we can use to enhance the production, but also maybe add another remote contributor. Our producer has control over all of these aspects. And then that Pearl 2 that's sitting in our production center is then sending the stream out, in today's case, over RTMP to Crowdcast, but that could also be simultaneously to YouTube or Facebook or Wowza or just about any CDN. As long as you have the bandwidth to support it, you have a lot of headroom to stream out to multiple platforms at the same time. So this combination can be really effective. And again, this is a conversation that I'm having with customers a lot recently, because this past year has shown people that doing remote production is actually a real thing. It's actually possible. And we've also seen people attempt it and not do a very good job of it, whether that's trying to do things with some kind of low quality earbuds on their phone as a contribution, or whether it's, trying to do it from your laptop with your webcam staring up your nose. There's better ways of doing it. And this type of system where we're using Pearl 2 as a production hub to bring in as many as up to 6 SRT inputs and be able to send out SRT outputs simultaneously and, of course, stream to other destinations at the same time. And then using something like Pearl Nano as the remote contributor device, since it can bring in high quality camera signals, high quality audio signals, and send that SRT stream into our production hub. So this is a great combination in order to really get make the most of a professional setup for remote production. The other thing, and I mentioned this already, is that leveraging something like Epiphan Cloud, or maybe even your own private infrastructure like VPNs or remote desktops or a number of other tools, you could have a remote producer that is not physically present with any of this hardware running the entire show remotely. And again, this is exactly what we do. My producer has an amazing command center set up in his home office, and he has remote control of the Pearl here in my home. He just starts the SRT stream when he needs to get it going. myself as the presenter, I don't have to worry about checking it because I know he's checked it. So if there's a problem, he'll tell me. At the same time, he's using the Pearl 2 in the office remotely to create the entire program and to do the streaming, to do recording, to do everything basically. And of course, he's also controlling the CDN side, in today's case, Crowdcast. So this gives you the ability for someone totally remotely having end-to-end control over the entire flow. They might, have to make sure you power on the devices, of course, but aside from that, it's something that's extremely powerful from a remote workflow. So we're going to dive into a little bit of hands-on demo here. I am going to pause for just a moment to quickly scan through chat because I did see a bunch of things there, and I know things were being put into the Q&A panel. So I just want to remind people, if you have questions, please put it into the Q&A panel because if it goes into chat, I may miss it. I know some of them have been promoted over there, but just a reminder. And of course, in the Q&A panel, there's also that upvote tool so that if you see someone else's question that you would like answered or as a duplicate of your own, use that update tool to address that. So like I said, I'm just going to quickly scroll through here and look at a couple of these pieces. Because I think most of these got promoted. So I'm not going to, if they've already been promoted over, I'm not going to answer those. Let's see. There's a good question here, actually, that Mark mentioned here. Is Epiphan Live cross-platform compatible, i.e. Mini and Nano? So I just want to clarify something there about Epiphan Live and the administrator interface for that matter. The web UIs of the admin interface and Epiphan Live are hosted from the hardware itself. They're not cloud-based systems. So they run off the device, which means you can use them entirely locally without even connecting to the internet. And that being said, Mini does have Epiphan Live. Pearl 2 has Epiphan Live. Nano does not. And there's a number of reasons for that, primarily being that it really wouldn't accomplish anything since Nano has other features that perform some of the tasks that would be left for Epiphan Live to use. And switching is one of the heavily used portions of Epiphan Live, and Nano doesn't even have that as a function. So Nano does not have Epiphan Live, but Mini absolutely does, and so does Pearl 2, and they run from the device. Let's see. Again, just going to quickly scroll through this and just see. I think there's a couple things here, but yeah, I think most of these will be answered, and see people just chatting back and forth and answering each other's questions. So that's excellent. Great to see that. So let's dive into a little bit of the actual UI. So I'm just going to change my screen share here, and we're going to bring up the UI for the Pearl 2. And again, I'm accessing this Pearl 2 remotely. It's actually sitting in my normal demo studio in the office. And of course, I'm not there. I haven't been there in over a year now. So we're doing things still remotely. But honestly, I find it's a great way to highlight the ways that you can use a Pearl, because I have no problem accessing it remotely through Epiphan Cloud this way. So this is the main administrator interface for Pearl 2. In here is, like I mentioned earlier, is the deepest level of control that we have over Pearl 2. Now, usually when I do walkthroughs on this, I like to start from the bottom and work our way up because things get more interesting that way. Starting at the bottom, we have our main information page. That's this page. This is the first page we see when we log into a Pearl. It gives us a lot of system information, firmware version, serial number. We can assign some device information if we want as kind of metadata information. We get a summary of our encoding channels. But that's just kind of a quick summary. And we can come back to this page because this channel summary is actually really helpful as we do things. But the information page is a great piece. It's the main landing page. From there, we have pages for firmware upgrades. This is something that we release firmware upgrades for Perls periodically, usually 2 or 3 times a year, sometimes more. Sometimes these contain major features. Sometimes they're smaller features but have quality of life or bug fixes. So we do release those periodically. 4.13 was released earlier this year and enhanced some things we're going to talk about in a moment. But when new updates are released, Perl, you can do a check for updates. It'll download the file and update itself, assuming that it has internet access. This is also where we would activate the 4K add-on feature for Perl. The default setup for a Perl 2 out of the box is that it's capable of up to full HD. The hardware is capable of 4K, and if you want to leverage 4K, there is this additional 4K add-on available at an additional cost to unlock those 4K features. Not everyone needs 4K. In fact, most people don't. It's still something that's kind of a niche corner case workflow for a lot of people, partially because streaming in 4K is so bandwidth heavy. So a lot of people are still looking at a 1080 workflow. But if it is something that you're looking to do, this is where you can activate or click through to purchase the 4K add-on. There's some other kind of basic maintenance things here. You want to run a check disk on the internal storage, you can do that. The maintenance menu has a whole bunch of different stuff in here that can be really helpful. There are some pieces here, that can help us support you better up at the top, including things like enabling permanent logs and being able to download those. But probably one of the biggest pieces of the maintenance section is configuration presets. The configuration presets means that we can build essentially system profiles, and we can create them based on a number of different sections. So things like system is going to kind of be global system settings like time and date and passwords, that kind of thing. Network settings, so if we set a static IP address, things like that. And then input settings, if we have particular settings as we get to the input pages, you'll see those. EDIDs for some of those inputs. Our channel settings, automatic file upload rules, content management, integration settings, Epiphan Cloud status settings, touchscreen settings, and so on. But we can create a number of different options here that can be really helpful. So sometimes maybe I just need a way to reset this device back to something close to factory, but not lose my pairing to Epiphan Cloud and not mess up my network or deal with passwords. I could create a preset that looks kind of like this. Call it something. Let's see. Let's call it failover. I don't know why. I just chose that name for no reason. But I can save that. And it means I have a new configuration preset here. Now, if I went and made a change, just as an example, I'm going to delete this channel. Just going off script, doing this live, guys. But because I have this preset, I lost one of my channels, but now I have this preset here. I can apply this, and it's going to restore what I had previously when I saved it. So you can see my second channel came back. That's a very, very brief way of showing what you can do with that. But you can dive deeper with that. So maybe you have event A versus event B. They have totally different configurations. You could predefine them in advance and save them as different presets and be able to switch between them quickly instead of having to rebuild from scratch every time. So presets can be a very powerful tool. Also in maintenance, you'll find things like doing full factory resets, which will wipe all data and so on. Before I leave presets, you'll also notice a part here about importing config presets. So you'll notice I saved this one. There's a download button. I could actually download this as a file, and then I could take that file, import it to another Perl 2, and apply it there. So maybe I build up a configuration I'm particularly fond of. I love it. I save it. I download it. I can then upload it to other Perl 2s to clone that configuration across multiple units. So there's some great pieces there. The media tab, this basically, when we upload images that we're going to include in our layout designer later, they would live here. I could add more here, I can delete some, but they live here. Serial port configuration, there's not a whole lot to change here. We have a number of different APIs that you can use to control a Perl externally from third-party control systems. That would include an HTTP-based API, but also a serial RS-232-based API. There's not a whole lot to configure here other than flow control. The rest, and of course, the settings are displayed there. So if you're using serial, you probably want to look at this and make sure that these match your controller and the flow control is set appropriately to the controller as well. The external keyboard settings, this applies to when we're using a local console. There is a touchscreen mode as well, that if we needed to maybe enter an ad hoc recording information for our CMS based on what's displayed on the touchscreen and just connect a USB keyboard, we could do that, or the local console. And this really gives us, if we need a different language layout of that keyboard, there's a bunch of options here. And then there's also some buttons we can assign for layout switching. The touchscreen menu, this gives us options for what's allowed or not allowed on the front touchscreen, including turning it off entirely, but even just minimizing some of the access control there. So maybe we don't want people to have access to the network settings or configuration presets on the front touchscreen. We could disable that portion. Or maybe we don't want them to see system status. We can turn that off. Maybe we want to lock the whole thing out with a PIN code. We can do that as well. So there's a few things here that we can tweak to make the physical access to that front touchscreen more in line with what we need. The security tab, this really shows us a bunch of those different security options that I mentioned earlier. So built into Perls, there are 3 different accounts: administrator, operator, and viewer. It's pretty logical the way these roles are defined. The administrator is everything. Operator does routine operations, doesn't really have control over system level functions. And then viewer can basically just view the files, streams, that's it, nothing really else. There's a few things that we can do here though. For example, with the operator account, we could add some additional privileges. So if we're in a position where the operator needs a little bit more control, maybe they need to be able to change some of the channel encoding settings, then we could grant them just that additional piece. Or maybe they should have network control, but nothing else. We can grant them that. So we can fine tune what the operator is to make them closer to administrator, but not quite an administrator. We can also, as I mentioned earlier, enable LDAP authentication. And this, your domain administrator would be able to configure this so that people would log in with their domain credentials, and on the back end in the domain, they could assign group domain policies to the different kind of account levels within Perl: administrator, operator, and viewer. So that when someone logs in using their domain credentials, they're going to be placed appropriately. There's also the options here for enabling the HTTPS instead of regular HTTP. The certificate abilities are there, uploading certificates, private keys, and so on. And you can even look at some of the certificates there. There are a number that are built in by default, but again, you can customize that. And then lastly, if you want to really be very specific and very granular, you can use IP-based authentication. You can create an allow and a deny list based on IPs. Time and date settings, pretty self-explanatory. By default, it's going to reach out and pull internet time and keep synchronized to that. But you can set time manually if you prefer. But time and date's pretty straightforward, I think. Network settings, again, these are pretty straightforward from a networking perspective, but there are some features in here that can help fine-tune networking for your particular installation needs. So by default, Perl's in a DHCP configuration, but you can change that to a static configuration and configure whatever it is that you need. If you use or want to use fully qualified domain names through DHCP with Perl 2, we do have the option of DHCP option 81 to kind of keep the DHCP server updated with the fully qualified domain name that you want to give to Perl. So again, this can be very helpful for some people. Instead of having to use IP addresses or tell people IP addresses, you can use names instead. This is also where we would enable 802.1x authentication if that's important for our use case. There's a number of different authentication methods. There's a number of different pieces we can use here. There's certificates if we're using those. There's again, it's depending on what the requirements are for your particular network with 802.1x. We have a number of options there. By default, Perl also makes itself discoverable using essentially MDNS or Apple's Bonjour service, if you will, by having the serial number.local available in the local network. If for some reason that's shouldn't be used on your internal network or you don't want to use it, you can turn that off. And then lastly, very recently, we added this feature, and that's for dynamic DNS. So again, DynDNS can be really handy in a number of ways to update a domain name, a DNS name, to whatever the IP address that changes on Perl. So we can enable this. We can use a provider like DynDNS or NoIP or a custom one where we provide all of the detailed credentials. And this is going to make it very easy, if people need to find out where Perl is, externally through a name, if that's how you have it set up, you can easily do that by leveraging this. For anyone who's ever played with dynamic DNS on your router or anything like that, these settings are going to look very familiar. And we also added a number of network diagnostics. Now, this is an amazing diagnostic tool. We built in a bunch of different pieces. Previously, we had just basic ping tools and some traceroute tools. Now we have a number of others, including connectivity status. We have, which I'm going to start right now just to show you. This runs a quick connectivity status and will give us a readout of what's going on with this unit. So we know what our local network speed is, IP addresses, MDNS is working, DNS is working, captive portal, meaning, maybe we're connecting to a network that requires a login portal. There isn't one in this case, so we're good. The internet's working. These ports aren't blocked. Epiphan Cloud's working. These are great little tools to quickly find out, especially for plugging into an unknown network like at a hotel or a conference center. You can plug Perl in, run this, and find out how broken the network really is. Another great tool that we built in here is a bandwidth test. So we can use this to have Perl run its own speed test and find out what sort of bandwidth we're dealing with. This is really important information, especially when we're talking about live streaming, because we need to know what our maximum upload speed is. We could obviously connect a computer to the same network, run speed tests there, hope it's the same. But being able to do it directly on Perl helps us to diagnose maybe if there's a wire problem or something like that, or a physical port problem on a switch, or any number of things. So the bandwidth test, just like any bandwidth test you've seen on a speed test, it'll give you a download speed and an upload speed. The upload speed is obviously the most important part when we're talking about live streaming. So you can see here, this unit where it sits in our office is actually on a dedicated VLAN with a chunk of bandwidth carved out specifically for it. And so the upload speed is basically always around 20 meg, as that room has that much bandwidth dedicated just to it. So I know that with 20 meg, that's my headroom. I can do my math from there to figure out the maximum number of streams I can run externally from there, or the maximum bit rate I can do for a single stream. So that's some of the tools. Again, we can check domain names, we can ping IPs, we can do all kinds of different pieces here to help diagnose any network issues. All right, I'm going to try to go through a few of these a little faster here. UPnP. For those not familiar with UPnP, it's a great protocol for auto discovery of video servers on a local network. So Perl can share either live streams or recorded files using UPnP. It becomes a server. This is a great way for hardware media players to find this content on a local network basis from Pearl. Maybe it's a smart TV you want to play the stream on, or something along those lines. This is a great way to leverage UPnP auto discovery for that. The external USB drive. We can use those USB ports to connect external USB storage. Pearl won't directly record to that USB storage. It will use one of the behavior modes seen in this menu. By default, we ignore it, but we can then choose between maybe use it as a one-time move copy of recorded files on insertion. So this is a blind copy. You insert the media, and Pearl just dumps all the data, and that's it. Does it all blind. And there's some sub options you can have here. So delete it after it's been moved so that you don't end up moving it again, or maybe mark it as downloaded and ignore already downloaded files. Replace if it's already there, that kind of thing. There's a few kind of fine-tuned pieces you can do. Another very popular one, though, is to manually move copy to USB storage based on what you select in this UI. So I could go through my file list, check specific files, and say move to USB storage. So this is a very popular use case as well. Last, probably the most popular, is to include the USB as part of the automatic file upload rules. We'll get to that section in a moment here, but basically automatic file upload rules can be either a network destination or, if we set it up this way, a USB destination. So I'm actually going to enable it that way. The next section here is CMS integration. Again, Kaltura, Panopto, these options are there. We select one, we enable it, and it's going to ask for all the various different registration information and so on. So, we can enable these, we can turn it off as we need to. Maybe we're not using it with the CMS all the time, but that's where we would configure the integration with those platforms. Epiphan Cloud is where we would be able to pair this Pearl to our cloud account. When it's unpaired, it gives us a code. We use that to pair to our account, and that's pretty much it. It's very straightforward. I can unpair it from here, then I would lose my connection. So we're gonna leave that paired. And then finally, kind of in the main deeper level administrator stuff, the less fun stuff, is automatic file upload. So as I mentioned earlier, when we enable this, there's a number of different protocols we can use to have Pearl automatically push finished recorded files to an external storage medium. So that could be a network server, like an FTP server, a Windows share, a Samba server, an SFTP server, Amazon S3, a WebDAV server, or the external USB that we selected earlier. So there's a number of ways that we can leverage this depending on where we need to send that data. And again, similar rules to when we were looking at the USB stuff. We can, remove after upload, those sorts of things. And if we want to make sure that we're only moving files during certain time periods when maybe the network is less busy, we recently added the ability to schedule that window of time. So maybe we say, look, everyone goes home at 5:30, so let's let it upload, between 5:30 and 11:45 when the network is less busy, but not during the day when other people are trying to do things. So some ways we can fine tune that a bit. And then again, if we're doing something like SFTP, we have all the login credentials and SSH key information as well if we're using something like SFTP if it's necessary. All right, so that's kind of the configuration section. We're just going to get into the more interesting things here. I'm just going to take a drink of water for a second. When you talk for an hour nonstop, you start to get a little dry throat. The events page, there's not a whole lot to see here because CMS is turned off. But if we had CMS turned on and synchronized and Pearl was pulling down a schedule, that schedule would be displayed here. We could also trigger ad hoc recordings here as well, if that's what we were wanting to do. The HDMI output ports, on Pearl 2, there are 2 HDMI output ports, and they can be configured separately. So each one could be doing a different task. We could assign a local console setup, as we talked about earlier. This would show the administrator UI, mouse and keyboard connected. We could show one of our encoding channels, or we could even show an input port, more like a loop through. So there's a few different things that we can do here to maybe show a larger confidence monitor of our mixed and switched program feed, maybe send that to a breakout room or another device. Or maybe we just need our on-camera talent to stare at themselves as a confidence monitor, maybe even enable mirroring so that their left and rights are a little more better, logical for themselves. We can configure that on these external HDMI ports. If we need to scale it, we can, but by default, it will just detect what that display is capable of and match that. And again, the second one, same settings. We can just choose what it is, what we want, and they can be behaving differently. The input ports, kind of not a whole lot to configure here. The video inputs like HDMI and SDI, these are all digital video signals, so everything is pretty much auto-detect. There's not really anything that we typically have to change here. So this HDMI A input is coming from a computer that's running this looping video of wildlife, and it's coming in at 1080p at 60 hertz. If I needed to deinterlace it, I could enable that. If I needed to maybe load a custom no signal picture so that if this dropped out, I could do that here, and I could actually assign a different one for each input. If for some reason I needed to change the EDID that's programmed to this port, I could do that as well, although this is extremely rare. And then as you see, we get a slowly refreshing snapshot that I can use to, at least make sure things look correct and are not completely broken, and it is in fact the source I expect it to be. On my HDMI B input, again, it's a camera with a 1080p 60 hertz signal coming in. It's pretty standard. Same kind of general rules apply. I only actually have two inputs connected to this Pearl 2 at the moment. So for example, this other HDMI input, you'll see nothing is connected. There's nothing there. And this is what it would look like when nothing is there. And so you'll see we have the video HDMI AB, 4K AB, SDI inputs, the USB inputs, which again, I don't have anything connected on this device, but it would show us more information if it did. Audio-wise is where things start to get a bit more interesting, where HDMI audio inputs, again, these are digital. There's not a whole lot to change here. But one thing that you will notice is that all of the audio inputs have an audio delay setting. So if for some reason we are struggling with audio and video synchronization coming from a source, we can adjust this delay from minus to plus 300 milliseconds and anything in between to compensate for that. So this is coming from that PC input, that looping video, and you'll notice that I'm also getting some levels here, so I can monitor what those levels are doing. The camera has similar levels. Of course, it's a pretty quiet room. It's just ambient noise floor that's being picked up on that mic. When we get to analog inputs for audio, then it's a little bit different. It is pro line level, but there is some gain headroom here that we can adjust if we need to. And again, there's an audio delay setting. And if we needed to separate them into monos, we could do that as well. And analog B is the same thing, stereo pair or monos. So we can play with that. And then the last thing we'll do here is you'll notice there's a button down here for add input. This is how we would add our network-based inputs. So when we click add input, you'll notice our TSP is an option, SRT is an option, and NDI is an option. And one of the best parts about NDI is that on a local network, it can run an automatic detection. So you'll notice that the PC in that room is also running an NDI test pattern. So all I have to do to add that as an input, since it automatically discovered it, is click add. It's going to connect to the stream coming from that source, showing that it's coming in at 1080, at 1 frame per second, since it's a test pattern. And it's going to show me this very basic, intentionally blurred image that's being generated from that test pattern. So it's very easy to add NDI to a Perl 2 in this way. Whether it's a camera or this test pattern or whatever, it's the same idea. We can auto detect it and bring it in. There's other ways we can bring in information as well. I don't think it's enabled, but I used to have an SRT source from my other Perl in the same room running as well. But when I create an SRT input, I can configure it in one of the 3 SRT modes that Perl supports: caller, listener, or rendezvous. As an input, they're typically either listener or rendezvous. And listener basically means that our caller, our source, is going to send us the data. And so it just needs to know how to get to us by IP address, essentially. And there's things we can adjust here, like latency and so on. So again, it's pretty easy for us to bring in SRT. Of course, there's nothing there. But yeah, I mean, this is a fairly straightforward setup. Once you're used to configuring SRT, this is easy to do. All right, so let's talk about channels, because this is the bulk of where people are going to really make changes or customize or leverage a Perl. But I'll start by saying that a channel in the context of a Perl that terminology is being used a little bit differently here than you might see in some broadcast style equipment. When we're talking about a channel on a Perl, and I have been throughout this presentation, we're talking about an encoder. A channel equals an encoder, which means that every channel we create is a new, separate, independent encoder from the others. What that also means is that if it exists, it is encoding. Whether we're using it as a live stream or recording is running or not, it still is previewing, it is still generating an encoded piece of data. So we need to be careful with how we use channels because they are encoding, meaning they're generating system load. So if we have too many, we could be pushing Perl beyond where it should be. The general recommendation for Perl 2 is 6 channels, 6 encoders at full HD or a single 4K encoder. That's the general spec. Now there's some plus minus to that depending on some of the other tools that you might use, but that's the general rule of thumb and the recommended maximum configuration. So you'll see by default, I actually have 2 channels here. These are totally independent of each other. They have their own encoding settings. They're capable of generating their own recordings, their own streamed outputs, their own customized layouts for mixing and switching, and so on. They have nothing to do with each other in this state. In the automatic factory default config like this system is in, it automatically looks at the HDMI ports and goes, oh, those 2 are active. I'll just automatically grab those and put them into these channels on their own. Now, there's one big advantage of that. I could connect the 2 sources like I did and record them automatically straight out of the box without having to configure anything, without even having to touch this web UI. But when it comes to really building up what it is that we actually want to control, what we actually want to do as a full production on Perl, first thing to usually do is to modify one of these existing channels. So I'm going to look at this auto A channel, and looking at its status, I can see it's automatically selected a number of parameters. But I'm going to start with tuning this as though I am going to build a live streamed program channel that I'm going to stream to YouTube. That's the context I'm going to configure this for. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at my encoding settings. And I know I'm going to stream at 1080p and that I can support a decent bit rate like 5 megabit. Those are some assumptions I'm going to make. So my first step is to uncheck use current signal resolution as frame size. And I'm doing this because I know I'm going to be creating multiple layouts for mixing and switching later on. And in order for that to work properly, I need to use a fixed frame size output. If I leave this on, as this warning shows, every time I make a switch between the layouts I will create, it's going to try and adapt. And that could cause my encoding to stop and start, which we don't want. So I'm going to uncheck that first. It's going to give me the ability to show, set the frame size I want. 1080 is the default there, but maybe I want to scale to 720 or something like that. There are options that we can select here. I can then look at my more detailed encoding settings like keyframe interval, frame rate, and bit rate. Now, again, the context I'm choosing is that I'm streaming to YouTube. I know that YouTube prefers a 2-second keyframe interval. Platforms have different things they prefer, so always look up the recommended encoding settings for the platform you're trying to stream to and set your encoding settings appropriately. So again, in the context of YouTube, I know it prefers a 2-second keyframe interval, so I'm setting that to 2 seconds. At 1080, at 30 frames per second, YouTube likes bit rates between 4 and 6 megabit. I know that I have plenty of bandwidth. I'm going to set my bit rate, my encoding, to 5 megabit. I almost did 50 megabit there, which is the maximum bit rate Pearl can do. And no one would actually stream that. But 5 megabit. Now we're entering this as kilobit per second, so 5,000 kilobit per second is 5 megabit. The next step is to look at my audio settings. Again, I know that YouTube prefers AAC audio at 44 kilohertz. Pearl can also do MP3 as well as raw PCM audio. But I know, and most streaming platforms prefer AAC at 44 kilohertz. So I'm going to set that. I do want it in stereo. And I also know that generally speaking, although they can support more, YouTube prefers 128K as the bit rate for my compressed audio. So I'm going to choose that as my bit rate there. I'm going to save these settings. And now I'm ready to go look at some other pieces. So I'm going to look at my streaming destinations here. There's a number of pieces I can control in terms of creating local streams, like enabling a local unicast HLS stream or setting ports for RTSP or HTTP streams and allow and deny lists and things like that. But when I want to publish to a CDN like YouTube, I'm going to create a new stream here under the Stream to Server section and define an RTMP push. Very recently, YouTube also released support for ingesting HLS, and that's something that Pearl can do as well. So I could also define this as an HLS push or both at the same time if I wanted to. This is also where I might send an SRT stream out or an NDI stream out from Pearl to integrate into other systems. But we're going to stick to the basics for now and look at RTMP. So this could be RTMP or RTMPS, and essentially, this is going to autofill because I've used the system so many times, but typically I would be getting a YouTube URL. It would look something or exactly like this, and I would need a key that would look something like that. I would save that setting. This key goes nowhere, by the way. It's long dead and reset, but I would save that, and then when I'm ready to start my stream, I would just click Start Stream. And that's it. Like, that's all I need to do from a configuration standpoint for YouTube. YouTube does not use a username and password for RTMP ingestion. Some platforms do. So again, be familiar with the CDN you're using and what credentials it needs, but we can populate whatever we might need here. HLS is a little more involved. We recently published a video specifically around using Pearls for streaming HLS to YouTube. So I'm not going to go over that here, but check that video out. It's only a little less than 5 minutes long, and it'll give you some guides and help on HLS streaming to YouTube and what you need to do to set that up. Lastly, I'm going to look at my recording, because within this system, of course, I can be recording locally at the same time that I'm live streaming. In this channel, I would be recording whatever is happening in this channel. There's a couple of things here that I might want to change. The first ones are the time and size limit triggers. These operate on a whichever comes first and can help us to break files into smaller chunks, which can help make them more manageable. Maybe we're uploading them more frequently. Maybe we just need them smaller to fit onto someone's USB thumb drive, or we just need them smaller for better management. But the defaults of 30 minutes and 500 meg, you'll notice that at some settings, that might be a bit short. So I'm going to increase that. So I'm actually going to set it to its maximum size value of 64 gig. And I'm going to set the time limit to 2 hours based on that's roughly how long I'm going to record. But even if I go longer, I want them into 2 hour chunks so that when I go to edit them together, it's just a little bit easier. And then I could also look at the container type that I'm using for my recordings. The default is MP4, but of course I could also use AVI, MPEG-TS, MOV, and MP4 fragmented as various options. And that's really a choice of what's going to fit your workflow the best. So I'm going to save those pieces. And then lastly, I'm going to look at my layouts. And this is where things really start to get fun in terms of how we can build out a Pearl to be whatever we want it to be. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to do here. The first one is I need to find some images that I'm going to upload here. So I'm going to look for those in a moment, but yeah, there we go. Some good images there. So the first thing I'm going to do is this layout with this fun, little snake guy on my looping stream. That's great, but maybe I don't want to launch into that straight away for my piece. Now, again, it's set to auto. I'm actually going to choose that input directly, which is HDMI A. But I could also choose whichever other input I might need. In fact, I'm going to use my camera, because I'm going to make this layout be my intro slide. So I'm going to use my camera, and I'm also going to add a new item, and I'm going to add a picture. And the picture I'm going to add is this wonderful semi-transparent overlay. It says live stream starting soon. And I'm going to stretch that, and you're going to see here, creating layouts is really easy. It's a click and drag style interface. I'm going to stretch that full screen over top of my camera shot. You can see it's a little bit opaque, so I could see through it. And I'm going to make sure no audio is checked. And I'm going to save this layout. So now when I want to start a stream, this will be my first layout that I have up. It's a safety, right? I know my hot mics. Someone could be moving around, setting up. It doesn't matter because I got this great banner that says live stream starting soon. And all I did for that is upload a PNG image that we had created. So now for my next one, I'm going to create a new layout, which gives me a blank canvas. This canvas represents my encoded output, which we set at 1080p earlier. So I'm going to now add a video source. I'm going to add my camera back in there. I'm going to stretch it full screen because this is where someone would do their talky talk and intro stuff. And I'm going to set my audio. That's actually the wrong one. I'm going to set my audio. It's coming from HDMI B, which is the microphone built into that camera in this case. And I'm going to save that. So now I have two layouts. I'm going to create a third one. And the first thing I'm going to add here is I'm going to add a picture because I want it to be a background image. And I'm going to upload this colorful, if it will let me. Well, it doesn't want to let me. All right. Let me find a different one. Ah, come on. Of course, something's going to go wrong live here. While I'm trying to do this. It's either taking a while to upload, or it's just not being friendly for me today. See if I can do it this way. Oh no, but that's not true. I use that image all the time. Okay. But that's actually a great one to run across in the middle of this when I don't want it to, is keep in mind what what size your images are, because there are some maximum sizes that we can support here. But that one should have definitely worked. How big is that one? That one should work. No? Why are you not working? All right, I'm going to give up on that because all those images should definitely be working, and I don't know why they're not at the moment. So I would rather spend the time to go through this, but I don't have the time for it right now, so we're going to do it without a background image. But the first item I'm going to add here is what's going to be my presentation. And again, click and drag, right? So I can fine tune this to be whatever size I want. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add my other video source, which is my camera, and I'm going to make a side-by-side here. Now doing it this way, I'm scaling down that camera maybe a little smaller than I want, even though I want my presentation to be about this size. So what I'm actually going to do is assume that the person giving the presentation is going to be standing front and center, and I'm going to use the cropping tool to narrow the frame from that camera shot. And now I have a little more flexibility in how I can size and position that camera shot coming in to the pearl. So now I can have my side-by-side here with my presentation and my camera shot cropped, virtually zoomed in. And I can save this one. And I'm actually going to enable the audio input from both in that, which means both the audio from my presentation and the audio from my camera are going to get blended together in that situation. So there we go. I now have 3 layouts. This is a very simple setup, but what it means is that now I can live switch between these by either clicking the active shot button here or using the front touchscreen switcher, or I can even go into Epiphan Live, which when I click on that, it opens up another tab, and you can see here the more dynamic view of what's happening on this device. I've created a series of live tiles here to monitor my inputs as well as my encoding channel. I can start my recording here, and I'm getting a much more dynamic live preview here. I can see storage, I can see inputs, I can see audio meters, so I can get good, quick diagnostic information here in Epiphan Live. And then I can also go into the switching interface, and it's going to show me thumbnails of the layouts that I built, which I can send into my preview queue, and I can switch to that one when I'm ready to go live. And you'll notice they swapped. So if I use 2 frequently, maybe I'm switching between my presentation and my camera full screen frequently. They'll just swap back and forth as I go through and do things. The front touchscreen switcher UI basically looks the same or very similar to this. It's the same idea where you have thumbnails along the bottom that you can select from, cue it to the preview, and then switch to it when you're ready to go live. If I don't want to use the switch button, I can actually just double click as well and it'll trigger it. So that can speed things up a little bit, especially if you end up with a long list of thumbnails down here. But that's basically how easy it is to build up a very quick, simple, in that case 3 layout, but I can just keep adding layouts. If I want another one with maybe my presentation full screen, I had one with my camera full screen, so it should be fair and have my presentation full screen with its audio, and so on and so on. I can just keep doing that. So there's quite a bit that we can do here. Now again, going into my other channel, it's independent of this. It has its own encoding settings. And what I'm actually going to leave this to do is I'm actually going to set it to be 1080 automatically, which is what the input is. I'm actually going to set it to be 60 frames per second. And I'm going to record this at 12 megabit because I want this to be an ISO recording of my camera. And I'm going to set it to raw PCM audio because I want this to be a high quality recording. I can then, of course, change those same triggers that we changed before, make them just gigantic files, and I can have that recording running. And the input here, I don't need to define any additional layouts because I'm only doing an ISO recording of my camera. So I only need the one layout, don't need to define anything else. I can start that recording here and it's just going to run. That'll do its thing. My first channel here, which I could rename if I want to. I'm going to call it program. I'm going to call this one ISO. So again, we can name these channels to help logically organize them instead of just relying on the automatic naming conventions. And that's pretty much it. That's really all we need to do. So that's kind of the quick overview of setting up a Perl. We can definitely go deeper. Um, if we want to play around with it, I'm going to do that a bit more here for fun. Um, I'm going to do, actually, I know what I can do in my third layout here. I can rename layouts as well, by the way. I realized I added that NDI input, which would make a great background on this. It has that cool little bokeh effect. But oh man, it's now my top layer. That's no good. I don't want it to be my top layer. Well, luckily, all I need to do is drag the logical list here to change my layers. It's so simple. It's now the bottom layer. I save it. That's now a background image that's in behind there. Let's get a little more creative, make things a bit stranger for fun. Let's go in here. Let's create a video source. My camera shot, full screen. Enable chroma keying. Sample that piece of green screen cloth behind there, which I'm probably going to have to play with my blends a little bit here to get it right. Might even need to do this. The lights are not really turned on in there very well, so we'll see if we can get this tuned reasonably. Might not, but we'll try. That's close enough for a quick job. We're going to save that. So I've keyed out that piece of green screen, which is when we were rushing out of the office a little over a year ago in lockdown. We hung that piece of green screen knowing that someday we were going to need to do some demos this way. I'm going to add another video source here. I'm actually going to add that NDI, and I'm actually going to make it the bottom layer again, but only after I move it. So I'm actually going to move it in behind that piece of green screen, then change my layer and save it. So I keyed out that piece of green screen, and now I have a layer in behind with whatever I want. I chose that NDI input, but it could be my presentation input. It could be anything. And yes, I know the chroma keying is rough here. You can definitely clean that up. But for anyone familiar with chroma keying, lighting is so important. And in that demo studio, there's basically no lights turned on at the moment. So that makes it difficult to tune. But again, these tools are there, right? So we can use cropping, we can use chroma keying, we can customize the layout to be whatever we want it to be. It's really only our creativity that's limiting us. I don't have that other image. I used to have a great little watermark image. I'm not sure I can find it now. But, and again, a semi-transparent PNG image with just being able to load that as a watermark overlay is another great piece. So I can't find that at the moment. So what I'm going to do is let's look at your questions. So we're kind of wrapped up there on the live demo, and this is going to totally mess up the crop that my producer had, but we're going to have some fun with that. Let's look at your questions. That's the next step here. And if we need to go back to the UI to answer some of them, we will. All right. So thanks everyone for hanging in there. I know this is a long one. These walkthrough webinars often are. I did see some other questions in the chat there about will this be recorded and posted later. It absolutely will be. It is being recorded. It will be posted later on the webinar page on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So we are going to look at some of the questions. So the first question here that was upvoted quite a bit here was from Joel. Joel's just saying, can Perl 2 be a USB source into a PC to include into a web call? And I saw some people did answer that in comments. Unfortunately, no. The Perl 2 is not a capture card. The context of it is much more like a computer. So it's not as simple as just connecting it to another computer to mount like a capture card. It can't really be done that easily. So unfortunately, no. Andrew answered in the comment on that question saying, you could use the HDMI output into a capture card like our own AVIO to bring it in that way. You can definitely do it that way. The other way to do it with Pearl 2, if you happen to be a Microsoft Teams customer and user, is you could do that through NDI streaming instead. You could bring in an NDI feed from Pearl 2 into Teams and vice versa. So that's another way of doing it if you're particularly looking at Teams with NDI support in Pearl 2. Next question. Michael's just saying, we had a few times some issues with the HDMI outs using them at the same time, losing the picture, losing the sound at the second HDMI. Michael, you definitely shouldn't. There could be a number of things going on there. I honestly can't say I've really ever seen that myself. I would recommend, if you haven't already, reaching out to our support team and kind of going through some troubleshooting on that. But you absolutely should not be having dropouts or anything like that. Using both HDMI outputs do generate some system load. And so if you are potentially, depending on the configuration of your system, and I have no idea what it currently looks like at the moment, of course, but if, let's say, you're already pushing the limits of system performance even without the HDMI outputs turned on, and then turned them on, that could put us in a position where Pearl is being pushed so far that it's struggling a little bit in some aspects. Although I've never seen that happen as a result of it. That's one thing to consider as well. So I would say just reach out to our support team and we can engage on that and see if we can help figure out why that is. Next question here from Simon. The Pearl 2 has been on the market for a few years now. Is it soon to be replaced by a Pearl 3? No, there are no immediate plans to replace Pearl 2 with a Pearl 3. I'm sure someday that will happen, but there is no short-term plan to do so. We just recently launched the Pearl Nano, and I can tell you, it's not a lot of fun trying to launch hardware devices during this pandemic. It is painful and very difficult. So even if we did have shorter term plans, it would end up probably being longer term. But we don't have short term plans to replace Pearl 2. How future proof is the hardware? Personally, I hate the term future proof because in technology, it really doesn't exist. Things change too quickly no matter what you do. In terms of how future proof the hardware is, there's still a lot of things we can add feature wise to Pearl 2. So, for example, we recently added things like SRT streaming, HLS, Dash, and things like that. That's a way of saying Pearl 2 is future-proof for protocols that CDNs are going to start supporting as we go forward into the future, and we start to see usage of RTMP drop off and disappear. Next question, network question. Our Pearl is currently getting flagged for remote management service accepting unencrypted credentials. How do we customize our network settings to remedy this issue? It would depend on how it's getting flagged, but it might, and what's flagging it, obviously, but it might be getting flagged for SSH as having a port that's used for SSH being open potentially. If that's the case, then in the maintenance menu, and maybe I will change my share again just to throw a curveball at my producer. In the maintenance menu, up at the top, you will see a section for remote support. And there's a couple of pieces here, including remote support and remote connection to the support server. You can turn these things off, and it will close some of those ports that might be getting flagged by certain audit protocols. So that's how you would customize it to prevent that flag, is you could turn some of these things off. That does mean a few things. For example, if you turn off the remote support connection here, you won't automatically update and download firmware anymore because Pearl won't be able to reach our support server to give it the firmware. So you can definitely fine tune it, but you might be losing some things. But yeah, you can definitely fine tune that. And this is how you would do it in this section here. And that does happen in security audits every now and then, depending on the requirements of your network and IT staff. And I see in chat there. So yeah, go ahead, try it. And if you have any further questions about it, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team and we can help you with that. Next question. Can we give Perl 2 two different IPs? No, you cannot. Perl only has a single network interface, and it does not have a virtual interface, so it can only have a single IP. We are hoping in the future potentially to offer a feature update. This is not short term, but a little longer down the road, to potentially add the option of supporting a USB network interface as well. And that would give you dual NICs, which could obviously have different IPs and so on. But today, currently, no, you cannot. Dieter asking, do you need to wait after a recording before downloading or turning off the Perl? No, but yes. But to define waiting, because if you mean, do you have to wait a second for it to close out the file before downloading it? That's all. That's all it is. It's encoding on the fly, so there's no post. It basically just needs to write the footer on the file basically, and that's it, and close the file, which takes like a second. It's basically nothing. As Glenn commented there, should something catastrophic happen and power is interrupted, if you're using a fault-tolerant container like MP4 Fragmented or AVI, it won't be a problem. If you use a non-fault tolerant container, then you could lose data. But if you use Fragmented or AVI, even in a catastrophic power loss, you won't lose data. Next question here. Is it possible to switch video inputs over a keyboard input? So yes, it is. The important thing to look at is that you're not switching inputs on Perl when we're talking about switching. You're switching layouts, whatever those layouts are defined as. However, it's not quite as key A equals layout X. It's more of cycling things. So you can, but it's not quite as straightforward as that. So either using Epiphan Live as a dashboard so that you can select it is a better way of doing it. Using the local console so that you can click through the radio buttons of the admin UI to choose your layout. Or, as was mentioned there, using something like the companion app on something like a computer or even a Raspberry Pi, running the companion app and connecting something like a Stream Deck to that would give you button arrays. Some people have also used the Skarhoy MiniFly controllers, which you can program with our API to do switching that way. There's a bunch of ways you could do it, including creating your own interface based on our API if you wanted to. The API is totally open. HTTP API is great for that. We have a whole document on our support page on our website just for the API if you want to check that out, Roger, and see, again, lots of people have created their own interface for that, and there's lots of ways you could do it. And a lot of people just do it through a Crestron panel as well. Crestron actually built a control driver for the Perls, so it's very easy to integrate a Perl at a basic level with a Crestron system. So there's a ton of options. Joel asking, how many sources can be displayed in one layout? Technically, there's no limit. There's no hard limit to that. I've definitely done 6-way splits with all 6 inputs populated. You can definitely do that. There's probably some practical limits. The more you add, the more you're scaling. The more you're scaling, the little heavier the system load is, of course. So there are some practical limits, but there is no hard fixed limit to the number of inputs you can have in a layout. And this plays into the very next question. What is the max number of layouts for each device? Nano, Mini, Pearl 2. Nano is 1 because Nano doesn't have switching. It can create a single composite of 2 inputs. Pearl Mini and Pearl 2 don't really have limits. You can build a ton of layouts. I've known people with Pearl 2s to have 30, 40 layouts. Not saying it's a good idea because at some point it just gets too confusing, but you could if you wanted to. Joel answered the USB source to another PC. We answered that already. Unfortunately, no, you cannot. Joel also asking, let's see, is that Phoenix providing audio out, or is the 3.5 the only audio out? The connectors on the back are GPIO blocks that are not currently enabled in hardware. So they currently actually don't do anything. There were some plans and still are some plans about enabling them as programmable GPIO. Still won't be audio, but maybe something like on-air lights, tally lights, that kind of a thing. They're currently not used, and if you need an on-air light, you can actually use a USB busy light right now. So yes, the 3.5 millimeter on the front is the only analog audio output from a Pearl. You can send audio out over HDMI on the HDMI ports. Let's see. Next question. Answered that one from Chad about cross-platform. It runs on the hardware, so yes. Let's see. Next question here. Can Pearl 2 be associated with more than one cloud account at the same time? No. No, it has to be paired to a single account or a single team within a cloud account. So if you had multiple logins to cloud that need access to different devices, those people would just need to be members of different teams within Epiphan Cloud. So for example, your IT team, their accounts should be members of every single other team, even if you break those down into subsections. I hope that makes sense, Robert. But it would be paired to a single team in Epiphan Cloud, and as long as anyone's a member of that team, would be able to access it. And you can be a member of multiple teams. Steph just asking, for SRT, do you use the local IP or the public IP? Well, that depends on what you're doing. If it's external, then it depends on the mode a little bit. It depends on a number of things. The answer is yes to both. So if you're streaming SRT internally, of course, it's just the local IP. If you're doing it externally, it can be the public IP, but you could also set up something like dynamic DNS and use a DNS name instead and have some form of port forwarding to get through so that you don't have to know the public IP. But yes, oftentimes when we're going in and out of our network over the internet, yes, we would have to know what the public name is, whether that's the IP or maybe a DNS name. Next question here, can OBS send SRT stream to the Pearl 2? Absolutely. OBS, the Haivision Play app on your phone, the Rivet app from LiveX that sends SRT, another Pearl or another hardware device that sends SRT, anything that can send SRT could be used as a source. So that's no problem. OBS, I believe you still need to add a plugin for SRT. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't looked at it in a few months. I don't think it's there natively. It's still a plugin, but you can do that. I know Wirecast also does caller SRT, so we could bring that in too. All kinds of options there. Can Pearl 2 record in MXF format? No, it cannot. The encoding is H.264, and then the containers is as you saw in the menus, AVI, MOV, MP4, that kind of thing. Next question here. Say your Pearl 1 is still operating perfectly and amazing customers, fellow tech that comes across it. Is there an end of life date no more updates for Perl 1. Yes, actually, we actually have already hit that with Perl 1. Firmware 4.12 was the final firmware for Perl 1s. They will not be updated past 4.12. So great that that you have it, you're running it, you love it, and it's amazing. People, that's awesome. But the hardware was discontinued coming up on 4 years ago, if not about 4 years ago. And the end of life for firmware updates on Perl 1 was earlier in 2020 on the release of 4.12, which was just into the third quarter, I think, of 2012. I don't even know what day it is now, so date's probably not the best thing for me to do. So yes, you won't see any future updates for Perl 1s or Perl 2, Perl Mini, and of course the brand new Perl Nano have many more updates to come. Jeff is just saying he'd be interested to learn what other video playback devices other than a PC you've used to feed video playback into a Perl. I mean, it really kind of depends on what sort of input you want to use. I mean, obviously with NDI, it's going to be some sort of software based thing, but some people have done it with hardware NDI encoders as well. If you're connecting HDMI, then anything that'll output HDMI pretty much, provided, and I know this question's coming up, provided that device is not encrypting the HDMI signal with HDCP copyright protection. So we typically use software running on a computer, whether that's things like NewBlue or even OBS or NDI tools or any of those things. But there's a few different possibilities out there, just depending on what it is that you want to connect it over, I guess. Let's see. Joel also asking, this is the question I was expecting to see very shortly, how do the inputs handle HDCP? They don't. It's about as simple as I can get there, Joel. Because by nature of what Perl does as an encoder, a streamer, and recorder, it is not HDCP compliant. So if the inputs are encrypted with HDCP, Perl will not capture them. That's a legality issue. That's not an intentional choice, beside the fact that that's there for copyright protection, and Perl would make a copy of it if it's protected content. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to depend on the source. There are certainly devices and computers out there that use HDCP out of context when they probably shouldn't. That's on that device, not on Perl, unfortunately. So, would I expect your Blu-ray player to work? Absolutely not. But should any off-the-shelf computer typically work? Yes, it definitely should. But unfortunately, no, we can't capture that. And yeah, I see your chat there. It's with Apple products. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an Apple fan for a lot of reasons, and I'll be honest, that's one of them, because this didn't used to be an issue. This is something they created as an issue in later OS updates, and I don't know why. They used to be much better at being context aware. Yeah, that's about all I can really say about that. Typically speaking, usually the places I see that as more frequent of an issue is when the Apple laptop device is being split to a display and to Perl. The display, of course, is HDCP compliant, so the laptop, the Apple product, is picking that up and enabling HDCP always on. If you can, and depending on how it's being split or routed, if you can make sure that it picks up Perl first so that it doesn't think the chain should be HDCP compliant, that can help. But that totally depends on other gear involved. So that's something to look at in your particular setup. A question here from Till. Is there an adjustable fade between the layouts? No, not currently. Currently on Pearl, the switching is just a simple cut. It's a very clean cut, but currently there are no other transitions other than just that simple cut. It is something we are looking at hopefully adding in the future, some transition options, but currently not there. Hillary asking, where do you set up an NDI stream as an output? We set that up in our streaming channel, and I thought I showed this, but I can show it again. In our streaming, in the channel that we're wanting to stream, under the streaming setting, in the same place we would define an RTMP out. There's an option there for NDI streaming. We would just select that and give it a name, and if it needs a group assignment, and that's it. Pearl only outputs full NDI. It does not output NDI HX. And then the stream would be based on our encoding settings. So it's that simple. Name, group, that's pretty much it. Yeah, this question here, can you crop parts of a live image? Yes, and I actually showed that when I was building layouts. Yes, you absolutely can crop from video inputs to show, whatever section you want to show. And that can be done either freeform as I was playing with it, or when you go into cropping, you can even define specific sizes. So for example, maybe it's a 4K input and you want to crop only a 1080 section out of it, or it's 1080 and you want to crop only 720 out of it. You can actually choose those fixed values or a fixed aspect ratio if you want, so it'll lock the aspect ratio for you to resize. I personally love the freeform, but that's just me. So yeah, you can absolutely crop that and play around with it. And I saw an answer there saying, yes, you can. Not sure about the Nano. Yes, the Nano can absolutely do cropping as well. This question here, how can one request a feature like automatically stopping and starting a stream? The application is for a local church. I'd like to be able to automate it with a Raspberry Pi and a Serial API. So, I mean, in terms of feature requests, we're always listening to feature requests. You can always send us an email just to info@epiphan.com. Certainly the detail you've gone in there is very helpful, and we appreciate that. And that is actually something I would kind of stipulate as far as feature requests is it really helps us when we get a request like that to fully understand the workflow and use case of the reasons behind that request. That makes it easier for us to understand that request related to another request and how to prioritize things. So, certainly you can send us a message on those feature requests. We'll share that with the product managers and they can take a look at that as they balance what is quite frankly a lengthy list of feature requests. To break this down very simply, I would translate this into a built-in scheduler for streaming and or recording. And that's something we have looked at. It's currently not there, but it is something we have looked at to potentially add in the future. Of course, integrating with something like Kaltura Panopto, it can be done through those platforms. But standalone is something that we're looking at, but nothing is set in stone yet there for that particular feature. Can you start all recordings in all the channels for synchronized recording? You can. There's a couple of ways to do this. First is you can use what we call the single touch control on the front touch screen. So when you look at the front touch screen of a Pearl, and I don't have a way of showing you this, but there's a little icon that's like a hand touching a button. When you go into that, there's a start, stop button. And in the UI, you can choose which stream instances and which recording instances you want to participate in that single touch control. And then on the front touchscreen, when you push that, all of those instances you have selected will all start and all stop at the same time. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is you can define a recorder. And I didn't mention this going through the walkthrough because this is honestly not a great workflow for most people, but can be useful for some. In the UI below channels, you will find a part called recorders. Now, I talked about recording on a per channel basis. What recorders allows you to do is define a recorder that is a multi-track recorder. And what that means is you can choose which encoding channels you want to participate in this, and it will create a single file with a synchronized start and stop of that file, and it will have multiple video tracks inside that file, one for every encoding channel you've selected. This is great for start-stop synchronization. It's not great because most video editors don't natively support multi-track video files. You would have to split the tracks out first and then bring them into post-production. So depending on your workflow and the reason why you're wanting to do this, it could be good, it could be not so good. If the goal is to play all of them at the exact same time, not necessarily post-production, then it's great. And you put them into something like VLC Media Player, and each track will open up in a separate window and they'll all play at the same time synchronized. So for things like security applications and similar, that can be a great feature. Otherwise, using that one-touch control on the front touchscreen with multiple independent kind of channels and recording themselves is usually better. Question here, how are we forwarding SRT packets into the production system? Are you running a point-to-point VPN? Using a NAT at the production end? So, I mean, you can do it a bunch of different ways. We've done it both ways. So you can do it through a VPN, and that is definitely one of the preferred ways for a secure connection, and definitely we have done things that way. But sometimes, you know, your contribution side may not be set up or capable of set up getting a VPN going. So in that case, typically what you're going to do is some sort of port forwarding. In our case, we might use a DNS name that my contribution stream is hitting that DNS name, and that's being translated internally to where that Perl is sitting. So, you know, that's one way of doing it as well. And that is something we do when we have to bring in, you know, people from outside the company into that workflow, because we're not going to set them up necessarily with the same VPN connections we might use internally. So both are yes, depending. It just depends on what you need. Joel, can you stream into a WebEx call? To my knowledge, WebEx does not support ingestion of any streams. It's based on your webcam connected to the app running on a computer. I'm not aware that WebEx supports any external stream inputs. So this goes back to the question earlier about, can you connect Perl over USB to another computer? The answer being no. You could do it by capturing the HDMI output from Perl and into a capture card, which is running as a webcam in WebEx. Victor's just asking, can camera tally lights work with Perl? No, Perl doesn't have true camera tally control, so each camera having their own light. The only thing we currently have within Perl is use of a busy light, which is really an on-air light. You can connect a busy light. It's going to illuminate when you're streaming or recording and be dark when you're not. So a little different from tally, which is what we currently have. Usually when we're looking at tally, to be honest, is usually a much more involved, like full production video switcher put in front of a Perl, and it's running all the tally. So kind of depends on your workflow, but that's usually what we see with full tally stuff. And the final question here, and then we will let all you fine people go. Hillary just saying, Epiphan Live Video Switcher is grayed out in the menu. That's because most likely you don't have more than one layout. It's important to note the difference between channels, which, as we mentioned near the beginning, channels are encoders. layouts live within a channel. Layouts is what we're switching. So until you define more than one layout, you cannot switch because there's nothing to switch. So once you create more than one layout, you will see that that menu item in Epiphan Live is available. Okay, Joel, I'll allow this one last question, then we are going to close off the Q&A, but I really appreciate everyone's time today. Our current or future integration with Dante or AES 67. Dante has been asked about a lot. It's something that we certainly have looked at a little bit. We haven't made any firm decisions on that yet. Again, I get asked about it a lot, and usually my follow-up question is, what's your workflow, or what did you have in mind for Dante? When we're looking at these future kind of updates and features, we have to look at, how is that going to be used? Is it actually going to be used? And that sort of thing. And how many customers is that going to benefit compared to the lengthy list of other things we'd like to do, and weigh those out. Dante's cool. Dante's really awesome. I honestly have yet to encounter outside of some small corner cases workflows where Dante is used with Perls, and that may change. Similar, it did with NDI. We didn't add NDI for a while because it didn't really make sense, and NDI started picking up steam, similar to SRT. So Dante might be in a similar position where, a few months from now, demand for Dante workflow is much larger, and we need to more seriously look at that. So it's not a no, but it's not a definite yes either. It's something we're considering and looking at. And those are the questions. Again, appreciate everyone's time. If you haven't weighed in on the polls yet, please do. There are a number of questions asked in those polls. And this gives us great ideas, a lot like Joel's question about Dante. And kind of gives us an idea. Like, there's questions in there about, have you used NDI? Have you used SRT? Getting a sense of those. Like, I can see with SRT, 25% of respondents said they don't plan on using SRT. But 53% did, right? So that kind of response tells us that SRT is a great feature that people, are using, right? So we have to look at those things and weigh those things out. So that's great. I really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can send us an email to info@epiphan.com. And if you want to look at more detail, check out the website, epiphan.com. We have Perl 2, Perl Mini, Perl Nano, and all of the other Epiphan products up there. We have tech specs. We have support pages with very in-depth user guides for anyone who has questions about your Perl. And then our support team is available at that email address, live chat through the website, and you can always give us a call as well. And we're happy to chat with you and give you any assistance you might need on your Perl 2. That'll do it. My voice is tired. We will see you next time. That last question, Joel saying recording available. It will be available. It'll be posted to the website, epiphan.com/webinars. Usually takes about a day. We do a little bit of trimming and cleaning it up. It'll also get posted to our YouTube channel. So if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, I would highly recommend that you subscribe to the YouTube channel, where we post a ton of content, not only these webinars, short how-to videos, our bi-weekly Live at Epiphan show, and all the things. We share a lot of information, a lot of great information. Last Thursday, our live show, we brought in the CEO of Crowdcast. You've been watching us on Crowdcast, and chatted with him all about Crowdcast and why we love it. So check that one out. I found it awesome. Sai was an amazing guest. That's it. Thanks. See you later, for real this time. Bye, everyone.